We have explored how John makes decisions by weighing trade-offs and calculating opportunity costs. But what actually triggers John to change his path? What forces move him from one choice to another? This brings us to the fourth principle of economics, which is perhaps the most powerful tool for predicting human behavior. People respond to incentives. By definition, an incentive is something that induces a person to act, such as the prospect of a punishment or a reward. In the framework of Gregory Mankiw, because rational people like John make decisions by comparing costs and benefits, their behavior changes when those costs or benefits shift. In other words, John responds to incentives. You can think of incentives as the gas pedal and the brake of the economic world. If you want John to do more of something, you increase the rewards. If you want him to do less, you increase the costs. Let's look at a basic market example. When the price of apples rises, John faces a new economic reality. The cost of buying an apple is now higher, so he decides to buy fewer apples. He might switch to pears because the relative cost of pears has decreased in comparison. This is John responding to a negative incentive. The higher price acts as a deterrent. At the same time, the higher price provides a positive incentive for apple farmers. They see that the benefit of selling an apple is higher, so they decide to hire more workers and harvest more apples. In both cases, a change in price, a market signal, shifted the behavior of the participants. Incentives are not always about money, but in the world of finance and economics, they usually take a financial form. Consider John's career. If his employer offers a bonus for completing a project ahead of schedule, the benefit of working late hours suddenly increases. The opportunity cost of John's leisure time remains the same, but the marginal benefit of his working hour has gone up. As a rational actor, John is now more likely to sacrifice his evening of rest for the project. However, understanding incentives is not just about identifying rewards. It is about predicting how people will react to changes in policy. Mankiw emphasizes that policymakers often fail to understand the secondary effects of the incentives they create. A classic example is the law requiring drivers to wear seatbelts. The direct intent of the law was to increase auto safety. By making seat belts mandatory, the benefit of surviving a crash increased. But how did this change John's incentives while driving? Because John feels safer wearing a seatbelt, the cost of driving fast and aggressively decreases. He might drive a little faster or pay a little less attention to the road because the perceived risk of a fatal accident is lower. The result? A seatbelt law may lead to more accidents, even if it leads to fewer driver deaths. This is a classic example of an unintended consequence caused by a shift in incentives. In the world of corporate finance, which John will encounter later, incentives are built into the very structure of companies. Why do CEOs receive stock options? To align their incentives with the shareholders. If the CEO, like John, only receives a flat salary, he might be tempted to work less or take fewer risks. But if he owns stock, he has a direct incentive to increase the company's value because he will personally profit from a higher share price. John must also realize that incentives can be perverse. A perverse incentive is one that has an unintended and undesirable result that is contrary to the interests of the incentive makers. For example, if a company pays its software developers based on how many lines of code they write, John might start writing long, bloated, and inefficient code just to increase his paycheck. The company wanted productivity, but they incentivized volume over quality. To think like an Ivy League economist, John must learn to look past the surface of a reward and ask, what behavior is this truly encouraging? In the context of personal finance, John faces incentives every day. High interest rates on savings accounts are an incentive for John to save more and spend less. Low interest rates are an incentive for John to take out a loan and buy a house or start a business. Tax breaks for retirement contributions are incentives for John to think about his long-term future rather than just today's consumption. As John moves through this course, he will learn that almost every economic problem is, at its heart, an incentive problem. Whether we're talking about why a firm chooses to pollute, why a student chooses to cheat, or why a country experiences a financial crisis, the answer usually lies in the underlying incentives. If you change the incentive, you change the behavior. John's mastery of the economic mindset depends on his ability to identify these invisible forces. He must realize that he is not just making choices in a vacuum. He is reacting to a complex web of rewards and punishments that surround him. By recognizing these, John can better understand not only his own actions, but also the actions of every other agent in the global economy. In the next section of our course, we will move from the individual mindset of John to the bigger picture of how he interacts with the rest of the world through markets and trade. But for now, remember, scarcity forces trade-offs, trade-offs create opportunity costs, and changes in those costs and benefits create the incentives that drive the world.